For the better part of 2 years, Holt kept a receipt folded in the back of his wallet. $890. 2 nights in a convention hall outside Columbus, where a man in a headset walked the stage and told 4,000 people that the only thing between them and their real life was the size of their why. Holt believed him. He stood up when they said stand up. He hugged a stranger in row 19. He drove home at 1 in the morning, with the windows down and his jaw sore from grinning, sure that whatever he'd been for the last 10 years was finished somewhere around exit 42. 9 days later, he was hitting snooze 4 times again. He kept the receipt because throwing it out felt like admitting something. Every so often, he'd pull it out at a red light and read it the way you read test results you already know are bad, then fold it back along the same soft crease. $890, and he still clocked in at the same door, still owed his brother $300, still woke up Monday with his chest tight before his feet hit the floor. He wasn't lazy. Holt was never short on motivation. He just lacked the gear to keep moving once the excitement wore off. He worked inventory at a commercial AFAC and mechanical insulation distributor in Akron. 10 hours on concrete, scanning rolls, cartons, and pallets, arguing with a handheld scanner that lost signal near the loading dock. 33 years old. A car with a check engine light he'd learned to ignore. A girlfriend named June who worked the 2 to 10:30 shift at a call center and left him notes on the counter, written on the back of junk mail. On his phone, a dropshipping course he'd finished 40% of. A crypto app with a red number in it. A half-built website for a lawn business he'd named before he owned a mower. 19 podcasts, all downloaded, most unplayed. A note titled 10-Year Vision, written at 2 in the morning, that started with the words, "This time is different." He had a pattern. June could have drawn it on a napkin. Holt couldn't see it at all. It went like this. He'd get hit by something, a video, a book, a guy on a stage, and he'd be up until 3 sketching plans, buying domains, building spreadsheets with color-coded tabs. He'd set an alarm for 4 to start, and for about a week he'd be unstoppable. Then a shift would run long, or the transmission would make that noise again, or June would swap onto weekends and the house would go quiet in a way that made him get up and check the fridge every 10 minutes. And it would go out, and Holt would sit in his car in the parking lot with the keys in his hand and not start the engine because the plan was still on his laptop at home with 3 tabs filled out and 9 empty. So he'd go looking for another spark. His friend Trip called it staying hungry. Trip was always 3 weeks into something new. Vending machines, then a podcast, then a supplement thing his cousin was in. They'd sit in Trip's garage drinking cheap beer while the space heater ticked, and Trip would say the same sentence every time, usually right before he cracked the next can. "We're one move away, man. One move." Holt believed that for 2 years. At the end of the 2 years, he had the same job, the same car, and a folder of receipts. It ended on the last Friday in February, in a transmission shop off Waterloo Road. $612, the shop said. Holt handed over his card, and the machine did that thing where it thinks for a second too long, and the kid behind the counter didn't look up when he said, "It's not going through." Holt tried the other card. Same thing. He stood in a waiting room that smelled like burnt coffee and rubber, 33 years old, watching a wall-mounted TV with the sound off, and he called June on her break to ask if she could cover it until Friday. She was quiet for a second. He could hear the call center behind her, and then she said, "Okay. Yeah, I'll move some stuff around." Sunday was one of her days off, and they ate at the kitchen table without the TV on. June ate about 4 bites and then put her fork down. "Can I say something?" "You're gonna, anyway. Being broke scares me, she said. My whole family's broke. I know what that looks like. She turned her glass in a slow circle on the table, and the ring of water it left behind spread and thinned. But that's not the part I don't know how to live with. It's that I never know which guy I'm coming home to. Some nights you're on fire and you're telling me about Portugal or whatever, and some nights you won't get off the couch, and I can't plan a life around a guy with weather. Holt opened his mouth to defend himself and found that he had nothing. She was right, and she'd said it kindly, which was worse than if she'd yelled. He went outside and sat on the back step in the cold until his fingers went stiff. A dog barked somewhere over on the next street, and then gave up. For once, he didn't make a plan. He just sat there thinking, 2 years. 2 years of this, and I've been calling it ambition. There was a guy at the warehouse named Otis. Shipping clerk, 58, gray beard, walked slow. Like nothing at that job had ever been an emergency. Every lunch break, Otis sat in the same plastic chair by the vending machines, with a folded newspaper and a golf pencil, doing the crossword. Same chair, same 30 minutes. Every day Holt had worked there. Holt had always found it a little sad, if he was honest. Then, in the first week of March, one of the loaders mentioned that Otis owned 2 duplexes over on Kenmore, that he'd paid one of them off, that his daughter had finished at Kent State without a dime of loans. Holt sat with that for 4 days. Then he took his sandwich over to the vending machines and sat down in the chair next to the man he'd quietly been feeling sorry for. "How'd you do it?" he asked. "The houses." Otis filled in a word. "Boring," he said. "That's not an answer. It's the whole answer. Started with $40 every payday. Raised it whenever my pay went up. Lived in the first duplex and rented the other half. Took me 11 years to save enough for the first one, and I was 39 when I signed. Bought the second at 47. That's the movie. 11 years for the first one. You got a better 11 years lined up?" Holt laughed, and it came out wrong, and he heard it. He'd spent 2 years trying to skip 11 years. He'd paid $890 to a man with a headset trying to skip 11 years. The compressor on the vending machine kicked on behind them. Otis went back to the crossword. Then, without looking over, he said the thing Holt would end up copying onto the inside cover of a notebook. "Motivation's a guest, kid. Comes by when it feels like it. Never helps with the dishes. You need something that runs when you don't feel a thing." Holt did not go home and build a system that night. He went home and watched 2 hours of TV. But 2 Sundays later, he bought a composition notebook at the drugstore. 79 cents, the black and white marbled kind kids use in school. He'd owned $5 planners and $40 leather journals and an app with a subscription. This was the cheapest thing he'd ever tried, and that felt right somehow. Nothing to live up to. He made it deliberately small, because he knew himself now. He knew that if he wrote 2 hours a night, he'd do it for 6 days, and then never again. So the rules were these. 8:40 at night. He locked in 8:40 p.m. Dinner was done, his shift was over, and the kitchen was quiet. He just sat under the overhead light and opened the book. Same hour every day. The notebook. 1 page. At the top he wrote the date and the running day number. Then 4 lines. What he did, what it cost him, what he learned, what he'd repeat tomorrow. No essays. Some nights it was 11 words, $7. He had already paid June back from the next paycheck. He canceled 2 subscriptions, started packing lunch, and set the difference to transfer automatically into a savings account at another bank, with no card attached. $7 a day, $210 a month. He also sent his brother something every payday until the $300 was gone. 20 minutes of study. He picked one thing, refused to let himself pick a second, and then made the one thing smaller. He ignored the broader mechanical systems and stuck to what his hands already knew from the loading dock: commercial insulation, linear footage, and vapor barriers. Which specification called for which product? It was the material he unloaded, stacked, and counted 40 hours a week. He'd noticed that the estimators who priced the packages made more than the people moving them, and this was the one narrow corner of their work where 10 years of freight tickets gave him a head start instead of a handicap. 20 minutes a night, a used textbook, and a free course with terrible audio. And one repeated action on a kitchen timer. 25 minutes, no more. He started with archived training sets built from real school and county projects, each one with drawings, specifications, and a completed quantity sheet sealed at the back. Every night, he worked the takeoff on a single system. When the timer went off, he stopped, even mid-column, and picked it up the next night. A package might take him 9 sittings. That was allowed. The grading came later and in batches. Holt compared his linear footage, fitting counts, and material quantities against the completed sheet. Once he could finish the training sets without getting completely lost, he moved on to public bid packages that broke insulation out as a separate line item. His first takeoff was off by 60%. His second was worse, because he'd learned just enough to be dangerous. He wrote both down anyway. Most nights it took about 50 minutes. On a bad night, the minimum was 1 honest line and 2 minutes with the course open. He built it so a tired, unmotivated, mildly annoyed version of himself could still keep the appointment. On the 8th night, a Sunday, one of her 2 days off, June stood in the doorway with a bowl of cereal and watched him. "What is this?" "Nothing," Holt said. "That's kind of the idea." Then came the stretch that's hard to make interesting, because for months, nothing visible from the outside happened. Day 20, early April. Holt's estimates were still garbage. The savings account had $140 in it. He'd learned what a takeoff was and how to read a mechanical schedule, and he could feel exactly how much he didn't know, which is the worst stretch of learning anything. Day 40. A late truck kept him at the warehouse until 9:15, well past his hour. He got home genuinely angry about it. He sat down anyway and wrote 3 lines. Missed the hour. Too tired to study. Did the $7. He closed the book after 90 seconds. He'd broken the rule and stayed anyway. Every other system he'd ever built had died on a night exactly like that one. Day 55. Tripp came over with a pitch about shipping containers and found Holt at the table with the notebook and the timer. "What's that, a diary?" "Sort of." Tripp picked it up and flipped through it. Dates, 4 lines, numbers. He put it down like it was slightly embarrassing. "Man, that's it? I thought you were building something." "I am." "That's homework." Tripp pulled out his phone. "Look at this margin, though. 12 grand in, and by December." Holt listened, nodded in the right places, and noticed he wasn't jealous. 2 months earlier, that same pitch would have cost him a month. Day 90, the middle of June. June came in at 10:40, keys in her hand, headset marks still pressed into her hair. "Can I ask you something and you don't get mad?" "Sure." "Is this actually going anywhere? Or is this the seminar again with extra steps?" It landed, because he'd asked himself the same question 4 nights running. He turned the notebook around and showed her the page from day 1, then the page from 3 weeks earlier. The completed quantity sheet from that practice set was clipped behind it. Same handwriting, same 4 lines. Day 1, off by 60%. That one, off by 9. June looked at it for a long moment. 9% of what? The insulation scope inside a $110,000 mechanical package. A middle school. Huh, she said. And she went to bed, but she squeezed his shoulder on the way out, and he sat there in the kitchen light, listening to the pipes knock, and for the first time, in 2 years, he wasn't already planning the next thing. After that, they started spending 20 minutes at the table on the first Sunday of every month. Bills, work schedules, anything coming up that neither of them wanted to be surprised by. His brother had been paid back by May. Holt used to hate plans that small. June trusted them because they were the first ones he actually kept. He almost quit on day 138. It was the last Thursday in July. The air conditioning in the warehouse had been out for 3 days, and the whole building smelled like warm fiberglass, cardboard, and adhesive. Backing away from a stack, he caught his shin on the fork of a pallet jack, hard enough to make him sit down on an empty skid for a minute with his eyes shut. By evening, it was a bruise the color of a plum. He got home at 8:30, ate standing over the sink, and looked at the notebook on the table with something close to hatred. 4.5 months. A savings account with $966 in it. Nobody was calling. His pay stayed flat, and the warehouse smelled the same as it always did. He'd read maybe 600 pages about a trade he wasn't in. The whole thing looked like exactly what Tripp said it was. Homework. A grown man doing homework nobody assigned. He stood in the kitchen at 8:39 and had the full argument out loud, quietly, to the refrigerator. What is this actually for? What's the end game? You're throwing good time after bad. At 8:41 he sat down. He wrote the date. He wrote one line. Bad day, leg hurts. Did nothing but this. He opened the course, played 4 minutes of a lecture with his eyes half shut, and closed the laptop. He never started the timer. The $7 moved on its own at midnight, because he'd built it so it didn't need him. 8 minutes, start to finish. The worst night of the whole run, and the reason the thing survived the year. The old Holt would have skipped it and promised himself he'd double up tomorrow. He knew where that road ended. A convention hall, hands in the air, $890. He went to bed. He got up. The next night, he did the whole routine properly, and it felt like nothing at all. By August, Holt had told his supervisor what he was studying and asked to help whenever project-specific paperwork came through the dock. Most weeks, nothing came of it. Then, in the middle of September, the distributor agreed to stage materials for one of its largest mechanical contracting customers, which was building a refrigerated warehouse a few miles away. Holt's regular job didn't change, but somebody had to check each delivery against the purchase orders, packing lists, and approved submittals. Because Holt had asked, his supervisor handed him a clipboard, a highlighter, and a folder. Nothing he wasn't supposed to be holding, just receiving paperwork, as part of his 10-hour day. And on day 201, early in October, checking in a delivery of duct wrap, something didn't sit right. The product number on the packing list matched the purchase order. The problem was the approved submittal behind it. It called for cold service duct wrap with a continuous vapor retarder jacket. The manufacturer's sheet for the code on the pallet showed a dry side product meant for conditioned space. Every pallet was tagged for a refrigerated building that would run below freezing. 6 months earlier, Holt would have counted them, signed the sheet, and gone to lunch. Anybody might have, but he'd spent 7 months of 20-minute nights on this exact material, and the line in the submittal didn't match the label in front of him. It was the kind of mistake a person makes at 4:30 on a Friday, pulling a product code from the wrong project. Holt checked it 3 times. Then, before the shipment left his dock, he carried the folder into his supervisor's office with the 2 lines highlighted. If I'm reading this right, We should hold it until the contractor checks the jacket. His supervisor studied the pages for about 90 seconds, told the dock lead not to release the pallets, and picked up the phone. By Tuesday, the manufacturer had confirmed that the code was for the wrong jacket, and the contractor corrected the purchase order. The right pallets were rerouted before anything reached the job site. The contractor later estimated that catching it there had avoided roughly $14,000 in replacement material, rush freight, and lost labor. The following Wednesday, Marisol Vance, the contractor's estimating manager, came to the distributor's warehouse. She checked the held pallets with Holt's supervisor, then found Holt in the receiving bay. "Who found this?" "Me." "Your inventory?" "Yeah." "Where'd you learn to read a submittal like that?" "My kitchen table." A pause, longer than was comfortable. Somewhere behind them, a forklift beeped in reverse. How long? Holt thought about the stack on the counter at home. 2 composition notebooks. The second already bent and soft at the edges. 207 days, he said. She didn't offer him a job. That's not how it works. She asked whether he'd want to price the mechanical insulation scope for a small dental office retrofit on his own time. Holt checked with his supervisor first. The job had nothing to do with the distributor, and he got the okay. Marisol paid him $150 for it. It took 9 hours across 4 nights. After she corrected 2 small omissions, his material quantities were within 4% of her senior estimators. Then she sent another one, then a third in December, and that time she called to argue with him about his labor factor for 20 minutes. He found out later that was the interview. In January, she brought him on as a junior estimator, starting with insulation takeoffs, at $48,000, $4,000 less than he'd asked for, about $7,000 above his warehouse base pay, with regular hours and a path forward. He gave his notice on a Tuesday. On his last day, he ate his sandwich by the vending machines and told Otis, who filled in a word and said, "Boring, right?" Brutally. "Good," Otis said. "Now don't stop just 'cause something finally happened. That's where most people fall off." A year after he bought the notebook, Holt had $2,555 in the account, a new job, and a small stack of composition notebooks, the newest one marked with a coffee ring. He had kept the transfer at $7, even after the new job, just to prove the habit could survive success. $2,500. Holt will tell you himself it's a small number. It wouldn't cover a decent used car, but it was the first savings balance of his adult life, built by a rule instead of a burst of enthusiasm. He didn't care much about the balance itself. What mattered was realizing he could just do the work without waiting for his brain to feel like it. For years he thought he needed some kind of spark or mood to get moving, but none of that wanting had been there at 8:39 on a Thursday night in July, with his shin throbbing and the notebook waiting on the table. Most nights, the boring version asked for 50 minutes. On the worst nights, it asked only that he keep the appointment. Somewhere along the way, the question changed. He stopped asking if he had the guts for it. 8:40 hit, and he pulled out the chair. June noticed it before he did. "You got boring," she told him once. "Is that a complaint?" "No, I can plan things now." Holt threw the receipt out a couple of years later. He tossed it into a gas station trash can while cleaning out his wallet, right along with a few receipts and an expired insurance card. June, his wife by then, asked him about it a year later, and he had to think for a moment before he remembered. The receipt was gone. The timer was still there. It sat on the counter next to the coffee maker, and his kid wound it up sometimes just to hear it tick. And when people asked Holt how he made the jump, He gave them the same answer Otis had given him by the vending machines. Motivation is a guest. It comes when it feels like it, and it never helps with the dishes. If you've got a boring thing you've been doing quietly, no applause, no results yet, tell me what it is. Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one.